Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in San Diego Soccer History. I'm John Cross, along with Dylan Wilson. And Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
Doing all right. Been a pretty busy week, but hanging in there, staying cool. How about yourself?
Getting a little bit of a scratchy throat, as we were talking about a little earlier before we started. I hope I make it through the podcast okay. I don't feel sick or anything, but my throat is certainly sounding a little bit funny. So I do my best to stay hydrated and as I told you earlier, not cough into the microphone as best I can here. All right. Couple of things. I mean, we got a lot going on in the soccer world news. I guess we could do a little bit of some opening banter. We have a new commissioner for Major League Soccer. You have any thoughts about that at all yet?
I don't know a whole lot about him, other than he looks like a less Hungarian version of Viktor Orban. But other than that, I really don't. Somebody I've heard people say he's like very openly like skeptical, or even you could say anti-promotion and relegation. But I, I I don't know that that even really constitutes a change in terms of the attitude from MLS leadership. So I haven't really chalked that up as a notable thing. Other than that, I don't really know anything about the guy, to be honest.
Yeah, for the promotion relegation, probably mostly notable because he said something about it, and what he said was negative in terms of, you know, that could be any kind of direction for Major League Soccer in the future, which, as you said, not really any different than what we've had mostly from Major League Soccer and what comes out of the central office there. But we did have a change to a winter calendar, and Don Garber even saying something to the effect of, I know I said no before, but I've learned to never say never, which seemed like there was a hint of something there. But yeah, Larry Berg seemed like he didn't slam the door, but he closed it pretty much all the way, at least for the very short term. But it will be interesting to see if Major League Soccer teams change their, you know, salary structure within the league and salary cap structure and how that works out and streamline things a little bit and get a little more in line with the rest of the world.
Well,
Um,
I think that would be a good thing for sure. So we'll take that.
right. I agree. We need to get some of the, I'll call them training wheels off, I think. Um, Other than that, we certainly continue to have lots of FIFA news every week. Um, we have, I mean, we're a month-ish away from the under 20 Women's World Cup in Poland, which right now, unless something changed today that I didn't see, UEFA is still saying they're boycotting. Um, but what are you thinking about some of the conversations about UEFA, CONCACAF, the Asian Football Confederation potentially breaking away to form their own tournaments?
I mean, I don't. I guess it's good they're putting up some sort of united front, and not just taking this nonsense lying down. And I know that there have been kind of now at this point long-standing rifts, especially within the AFC, kind of between the more like Middle East kind of Gulf nation states versus some of the more like Far Eastern confederations. There's I've been a pretty notable kind of rift growing there for a while now. So, sure, I'm glad, like I said, to see United Front, but I think in all the conversation of the nuances, it gets lost that like the world's game as we know it is being torn apart so that some rich people can get even richer off this stuff. Like
Right.
that's what this is all about, and so it's just been really irritating. And then the whole nonsense that came out about Mexico and their confederation over this past weekend, I think, is just utterly silly. Um,
Yeah, I was going to
so
say, I mean, we say unanimous between CONCACAF, UEFA, and Asia, but um, it's not in terms of at least one large country like Mexico who has publicly put their weight behind Infantino. And then today I saw, now I had no chance to run this down and verify it all, but I saw a couple of people referencing like someone else saying, hearsay. So I don't know if this is one of those internet viral things that just someone starts and everybody jumps onto it. But about Infantino you know, offer we'll see about that. So I have to ask because my screen went blank. Did I go away for a second?
I think you did freeze, yes.
Yes. Okay. I was just saying, I haven't had a chance to run that information down about, Mexico being offered the chance to move to CONMEBOL if they back Infantino. I don't know if you heard any of that news today.
That's kind of what I was referring to when I was talking
Yeah.
about the silliness. I mean, it seems ridiculous enough to be true, to be honest with you. And I think I've mentioned on this podcast before, but the Mexican Federation, doesn't strike me as terribly well run, and I think that would be a terrible decision from them. Granted, if the World Cup expands again, like, you might be seeing the entirety of CONMEBOL qualify, but like, I think that would be a good way to make it a lot harder for themselves to qualify for future World Cups, because when you factor in the travel and the level of competition there, like, I don't think Mexico's one of the best 6 teams or whatever it is in CONMEBOL if they were to join. So, it just, like I said, it seems just silly enough to be true.
Well, and I think for us here in the United States, as I saw someone post on social media about it being the college footballization of global soccer. And that's what it feels like, right? All the conference jumping and shifting and people trying to figure out where they can be to have the most, not necessarily make the most money, but have the most influence. Whether it's
6 of one,
getting
half
rid of
dozen of the other.
Infantino, right? Yeah, I mean, ultimately it comes down to money as well. But whether you want to get rid of Infantino so you can have more control. I mean, I'm happy about CONCACAF, UEFA, and the AFC sticking together, and that's a majority block, because I am not a fan of Infantino. But UEFA, CONCACAF, and the AFC are, they're not great either as far as confederations and some of the things they do. It's just at the moment the lesser of the evils. And Infantino is certainly trying to make himself all powerful within the organization. But we'll see. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and whether there actually is a split. If there is a split, I could see CONCACAF, UEFA, and the AFC being successful as those three. But I can't see if it's just going to be CAF and CONMEBOL that could be a successful staging of tournaments on its own.
I think
maybe it could.
I think UEFA is really the key one there. It's even more so in the modern day with the kind of monetization of the game. UEFA is really the center of gravity in global football. Like CONMEBOL,
yeah,
I know Argentina won in 22. We're finalists this time around, but I think you've been kind of tournament after tournament seeing less and less of an influence from CONMEBOL teams in terms of impact on the pitch. So I think UEFA is really the key one there. And it's wild to be thinking of UEFA as the good guys here. Just
right. Yeah, that is. It's a strange world we're living in right now in terms of global soccer. All right. Well, let's leave that and let's get back to our San Diego soccer history, and let's jump to our trivia question that we left everybody with from our last episode. And it was, can you name the American goalkeeper who played for both the San Diego Jaws and the San Diego Sockers? Now, Dylan, I know the San Diego Jaws were way, way before your time of coming to San Diego. Even a lot of things with San Diego Sockers are way before your time. Even some, I think, that I would consider recent stuff, but I've grown up here my whole life. So it's easy for me to have some knowledge to draw back for some of these. And as I said in the last episode, if you're my age and you grew up when the Jaws were here and then the Sockers started, so 76 to 78. This is probably a fairly easy question to answer, but if you didn't, you probably have no idea. So, Dylan, do you have, I'm going to break it down to a 50-50 chance for you in a second, but did you have any idea here for the answer to this question?
No, I did not.
Yeah, well, the San Diego Jaws had 2 American goalkeepers. Those were the only 2 goalkeepers on their roster. In fact, most NASL teams had American goalkeepers, partly because of the rule that you had to have 6 Americans on your roster. So you didn't have to play them all. They didn't have to have a certain number on the field, but you need to have 6 on your roster. And remember, rosters were 16. So if you could get an American goalkeeper, you didn't necessarily have to play Americans in the rest of the field. And a lot of NASL teams did not. Or there might have been 1 or 2 Americans that were playing regularly in any kind of field position, going around to the various teams. So both goalkeepers were American. The first one was Gary St. Clair, and the second one was Alan Mayer. But only one of those played for the Jaws and then continued on to play for the San Diego Sockers in 1978. So of those 2 choices, you got a 50-50 chance right now. Gary St. Clair or Alan Mayer. You have a guess?
I mean, I can see the answer on our running order here, so I think it's hard for me to take an honest 50-50 shot there.
Okay, so the answer, again, for anybody who, again, is my age, should have known this, Alan Mayer was the American goalkeeper who played for both San Diego Jaws and then later for the San Diego Sockers. Now, a lot of people who knew him with the Sockers remembered that he played with a specialized headgear for a lot of his career with the Sockers. I'd say with all of his career with the Sockers. So he was a very recognizable figure because of that. And that was due to an injury he sustained actually in the year in between the Jaws and the Sockers when they were the Las Vegas Quicksilvers. He suffered a horrible concussion injury from hitting the post. And that's when we used, square posts mostly rather than round. And I can't remember. I want to say he had to have 40 stitches or something. He just had a horrible head injury and then wore a protective headgear after that ever since, and continued to play for several years and was one of the top goalkeepers in the NASL during the time he was playing. So that was the answer to our trivia question, Alan Mayer. And we had that because we're getting ready to do our 4th installment of our series on the San Diego Jaws. The last one we did was way back in March, maybe. I think it was when we did the 3rd episode, and that was when Pele came to San Diego. So we'll be jumping back into that series and now look and get into the 1976 NASL season, because where we left it, we were still in the preseason. So that's what we'll get to tonight. But before we get to that, we're going to review some news and current events of some local issues. Again, some people who are making records now or potentially on the verge of making some records. And then we'll do some birthdays, and then we'll get into our main topic. All right, so our first news and current event that I want to highlight is Jude Terry. He is a Chula Vista native, and we've mentioned his name on the podcast before. And if you're not familiar with him, you really should be. Last year, The Guardian named him as one of the 60 best talents in young talents in all of men's world football. This year, as a 17-year-old, he's starting to get more and more playing time with the LAFC first team. In the League's Cup match last week against Chivas, he came in as a 74th minute sub. The match ended 1-1, and in the League's Cup, they go straight to penalty kicks. But Jude Terry, the 17-year-old, scored the game-winning penalty kick for LAFC to secure the victory for that match. So big shout out to Jude Terry, 17 years old. He'll be 18 in, I don't know, about a month or so, I think. I'm trying to remember if I'm having his birthday mixed up with someone else. Maybe a couple months. So 17-year-old getting a lot of playing time at what most would consider the highest level of soccer in our country. So good for him. Any thoughts on that, Dylan?
No, not particularly. I wasn't. I didn't. Haven't really been keeping up. So that's pretty cool, and especially getting the start so early. You hope his minutes are managed, and not run into the ground like a lot of younger players have in the history of soccer in this country. So best of
Right.
luck to him.
And then another San Diego native, Christopher Jaime, who's currently playing in USL 1 for the Charleston Independents. Charleston Independents are one of 2 USL 1 clubs that have made it to the knockout stage of the USL Cup. And they're led by a core of 4 young players. And USL just did a profile on these 4 young players for the Charleston Independents. And you can go check that out at their website. And one of them is San Diego native Christopher Jaime. He's now 22 years old, and he's really developing into a strong number 8 for Charlotte, and doing so well could possibly see him make the jump up to the USL Championship next year, or possibly higher. So doing a good job. And this is one of those things. I know we come back to this occasionally, but I like about having our different tiers of soccer, and we'll love, and I hope it's successful and get off the ground once USL starts doing promotion relegation, because this to me is someone who would have been out of the game 20 years ago because there wasn't good places for them to keep playing, and from there a springboard to maybe play then at a higher level. And now with the connections USL clubs have overseas, as well as selling players to Major League Soccer, it doesn't happen terribly often, but it happens occasionally. It's good for both sets of clubs in a normal soccer ecosystem. So shout out to Christopher Jaime as well. And then Dylan, I don't know if you saw this. We had the National Soccer Hall of Fame semifinalists were listed today. I saw the list of the coaches group because in the builders category, they rotate. Like I think last year was referees, this year is coaches, and then it's like the generic builders, which could be owners and everybody else. But they rotate them on a 3-year cycle for that group. And then you have the veteran players, and then you have the players who are within that range of getting into the Hall of Fame on the first time. So I think it was on a different podcast we went over how the Hall of Fame voting works and the different steps along the way. But if you're in the veteran category, it means you got passed over initially, and then there had to be, I think, a 10-year period before you could get back on the veteran group again. And you have to get a certain number of votes to stay on that list within the veterans, even if you don't make it in any particular year, to keep your name in circulation, or you get kicked out. And someone could petition to get your name back in, but it's, I don't want to say terribly convoluted, but there's steps to this. So first of all, did you see any news about this Hall of Fame semifinalists for any of these categories?
No, I had not. I actually managed to totally miss that, to be honest.
Yeah, I was doing some last checking, in the a couple hours before the show, and I saw stuff that I'd missed today. So I'm glad I did, because on that list are 3 people with San Diego connections. 2 of those have direct connections to the San Diego Sockers, which then I think we have 6 people with connection to the San Diego Sockers that are in the National Soccer Hall of Fame. This could possibly increase it up to 8. We'll talk about the names here in just a second. And then we had another person from the San Diego Spirit. So since we had just done our 4th installment of our series on the San Diego Spirit last week, this was good timing. And we're going to be doing something on the 2nd iteration of the San Diego Sockers. We're going to start a series on that next week, because that coincides with the 25th anniversary of the 2nd iteration of the San Diego Sockers. So the 3 names are Allie Wagner. That's a name I know you've heard, Dylan, because we've talked about it before. She was actually the first round, the very first draft pick of the first round of the 2003 WUSA draft, selected by the San Diego Spirit. That's who she played with for the 2003 season. Unfortunately, as most of us know, if you know your history, that was the final year of the WUSA and the final year of the San Diego Spirit. But she went on to play and do lots of other things for her playing career and had a good career with the U.S. women's national team. So Allie Wagner's on the list. Sean Bowers, who is a Mission Bay High School graduate. Also, I think went to, I can't remember which community college now. I'm blanking out. One of the M1s. And most people would know him as the team president of the San Diego Sockers nowadays. But he had an extensive playing career, played in MLS, played a lot of indoor. So he's on the list in the veterans category. And Victor Noguera, the longtime goalkeeper in that first iteration of the San Diego Sockers, helped lead them to many championships. So he is on the list as well. So 3 people with San Diego connections: Allie Wagner, Sean Bowers, and Victor Noguera are on that list of semifinalists. We'll see if they make the final round. And then obviously then it goes for the official voting to see who makes it in, which will probably just be 1 or maybe 2 of those people. But we'll see if those 3 people can make it on the final ballot. All right, any thoughts about the Hall of Fame voting?
Pretty convenient for our purposes that there's a good San Diego contingent on there. We'll have to keep up with that.
Yeah, I think there were 11 total names on the list. And then I think from there it gets narrowed down to, now I'm forgetting. I want to say 5, but I actually think it's 10. And then when they vote, I think people can pick 5, but you have to get 75% of the votes from the people who actually do the voting to actually be picked. And I think you can have at most 2 veterans. That's how Kevin Crowe got in last year. He was one of the 2 veterans that got selected. But you can only have at most 2. Usually it's just 1. But if there's a second person who also gets 75% of the votes, there can be a second one. All right. Anything else on the Hall of Fame before we jump into birthdays?
No, let's jump in. That's a good segue.
All right. Well, I was going to mention this anyway. I already had it lined up for birthdays this week, but yesterday was Allie Wagner's birthday. So kind of funny that yesterday was Allie Wagner's birthday. Tomorrow, Sean Bowers' birthday. So August 10th, Allie Wagner. August 12th, Sean Bowers. And then Thursday, August 13th is Servando Carrasco. Servando Carrasco, Coronado native. He was a St. Augustine High School alum. He was CIF Player of the Year. But most people probably know him a little better, even in San Diego, due to the connection to his spouse. Are you aware of who his spouse is, Dylan?
Yes, I am aware, and I'm only even really aware of Servando Carrasco because his wife, Alex Morgan, I had a huge crush on her when I was in high school, and so I hated his guts back then.
Okay, I'm not really sure what to say there.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I knew who he was because, damn.
Yeah, Servando didn't have quite the professional career, certainly that Alex Morgan has had, but certainly as a local product and as a youth player and a high school player, he was one of the standouts we've had locally. I think it's unfortunate that I think sometimes what he's done in terms of soccer, especially locally in terms of San Diego, gets a little bit overshadowed by his spouse. But that's fine too. Is the big reason Alex Morgan ended up in San Diego and part of the Wave, and still lives here. So we can now call her one of our own.
And for all the times, birthday? Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, for all the times that a successful woman has been referred to as ex famous man's wife,
right.
we'll chalk this one up for equality, I guess.
Yes, I think that's how Segundo gets identified frequently as Alex Morgan's husband. The last birthday we're going to mention, it comes on this Friday, August 14th, is for Victor Arbolez. Now, Arbolez was one of the many forwards for the 1976 San Diego Jaws. Remember that, because that's going to tie into our trivia question here. He was drafted out of USF with, well, it was the Jaws' first pick, but they didn't have a first round pick. Their first pick was in the second round. But he was drafted out of the University of San Francisco, where he just won the national title the previous college season. And he played, as I said, with the San Diego Jaws. He played briefly with the San Diego Sockers, and he played with the Quicksilvers there in between. He did become a coaching legend in Las Vegas, where in 22 seasons, he led Bishop Gorman, which is the big Catholic high school in the Las Vegas area, to 11 state championships in 22 years. He had a overall record of 371, 31, and 8. He was able to beat throat cancer in 2002, but stepped away from coaching in 2006 and unfortunately died in 2007 at the age of 54. And if he was with us today, he would have been 83. But he's someone who, at some point, we will do a story on Victor Arbolez because of what he's done locally, but also what he went on to do after getting drafted by the Jaws and playing professionally a little bit, but then really getting into coaching and doing a lot of stuff in the youth area, even though it wasn't directly in our community. All right, those were the birthdays I had. Dylan, do you have anything else that I missed? And if not, we're going to jump into the trivia question.
I don't believe so.
All right. So we said Victor was one of the many forwards with the San Diego Jaws. And that will make a little more sense after we do our segment tonight of our fourth installment here in our series. But NASL rosters, we'll give a little background before we give the trivia question. NASL rosters were capped at 16 players for the 1976 season. The teams were able to have a kind of a supplemental roster, not quite a reserve team, but there were other players they could sign that were not part of the 16 that they could have access to pull them up if needed. That was part of the agreement when they shrunk the roster size for the 1976 season. So if you look at the entirety of the 1976 season, even though rosters were capped at 16 due to trades, people being dropped, other people being signed, you end up with more than 16 people who sign up for your team. San Diego Jaws over the course of the season rostered a total of 24 different players. Only 23 of those players saw the field during an actual official NASL match. So the question is, I'll pull this up. How many Jaws players of the 23 who saw minutes were listed as forwards? So this is just a straight up guess in terms of numbers. So Dylan, I'm going to give you a shot at a guess, and of course we'll give the final answer after we finish the segment, which will make a little more sense after we do our segment here. But how many of 23 players, how many forwards do you think were part of the team?
Are we counting like wingers, wide players as forwards, or like just straight up? Like...
Players were mostly just, this is hard also because in different eras of soccer, formations change, of course. But these are people listed as forwards rather than midfielders.
Okay. I mean, if you're going to
be a winger.
Yeah. Well, if you got 23 players, you figure 3 of them are going to be goalkeepers. So I like 5, maybe 6. I feel like it can't be like a very normal sounding number because otherwise it's not like a super notable trivia question. So I'll go with like 5 or 6.
So it's going to be one extreme or the other.
Right, exactly.
All right, 5 or 6. So we'll hold
Yeah.
on to that.
I hadn't considered the 0 option, but I guess
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah.
We will we'll do the answer at the end of this segment. But yeah, scoring is going to be an issue for the San Diego Jaws as they start the 1976 season. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Let me pull up my other notes here. All right, so again, this is our 4th installment of our series on the 1976 San Diego Jaws as we continue to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the team and its impact on the wider San Diego soccer community. When we last left our series at the end of episode 3, as we said earlier, the great Pele had come to San Diego for a preseason match at Balboa Stadium. The one and only time Pele was ever in San Diego for a competitive soccer match. So tonight we're going to pick up our story from basically the end of preseason and look at the first month or so of the 1976 NASL season. All right, Dylan, any thoughts or comments before we jump into the 1976 NASL season for the San Diego Jaws?
No, let's get into it. I guess the only thing I'll say is I wish Balboa Stadium still got usage as a more popular venue, because I think it's just part of a high school now, right? So I don't think it gets used.
Yeah,
really.
It's part of San Diego High School and City College both use the stadium for various things. Okay, that Pele match was at the very end of March. There actually was one other preseason match that the Jaws tied. I think it was against San Jose, but they wrap up their preseason. In terms of football playing, there were 3 total games of preseason. That doesn't count the indoor tournament that the NASL did prior to the season, which was kind of squeezed in there as well. But of their outdoor preseason matches, they only lost 1 match, which on the one hand is good, brand new team coming into the NASL season, only losing 1 match, but they're having trouble finding the back of the net. Of those 3 games, they only scored 2 goals. And in newspaper interviews in the lead up to the opening match, which is on the 15th of April, head coach Derek Trevis, and remember he is a player coach, so I don't know for certain, it's really hard just based on the resources I have available to me, but it seemed he did a lot more playing early in the season and a lot more, sideline coaching as the season went on, as they were able to get their full complement of players. But he's frustrated with their inability to score. Defensively, they seem to be pretty strong. They're doing well, and that's really, Derek Travis is more like a defensive midfielder, defender. He really, I'm sure, as a new coach, and this is me projecting here, but sure wanting to have a solid defense to stay competitive in matches, but they need to be able to score. And one of his quotes, and there's his, well, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically says, "We can't seem to control the ball to stop any kind of pressure from the other team." He feels the Jaws should be able to hold possession for a good 10 minutes in the other half of the field, and says that the team can't hold it for more than 2 or 3 passes consecutively. So they're just constantly under pressure in terms of the other team having the ball, having possession, really pushing towards the goal. So something they need to strengthen going into the season and in their last couple weeks to get ready. And then off the field, they're doing a lot of things to get in the community, to drum up support for the upcoming season, raise awareness, and really try to do things in and around youth soccer, get the kids excited about the game. And an example of one of the types of things they did in early April, they had an exhibition at Montgomery High School. Some San Diego Jaws players were there, but there was also an indoor game between Montgomery High School soccer players and Southwest High School soccer players. Since the Jaws were there and the GM we talked about before, Paul Deese, in an earlier episode, his big thing that he always brought with him when he did these community outreach events was he would bring that 30-minute Pele's World film that Warner Brothers produced as a promotional piece specifically for the NASL and for the season, and sent it out to all the teams so they could share it with their communities to try to get people excited about soccer. So he'd always bring that. So that was one of the things that he would consistently bring with him and show different groups, especially kids. And the press coverage in general is overwhelmingly positive for the San Diego Jaws. It's just sparse, right? You're not seeing coverage of the San Diego Jaws on the front page of sports sections of our local papers. You're seeing it kind of buried with the stories about high school and college athletics. So it's a little deeper into the the sports section even. So unless you're a devoted sports fan, probably not catching a ton of people's eyes. And it's not regular, it's semi-regular kind of coverage. And certainly at this time in local San Diego newspapers, especially the ones that target the South Bay or the North County, they do a lot of very local, hyper local coverage on youth sports. It is a big part of their sports section, along with the other big sports that we have throughout the county. So these are some of the things that the Jaws are doing to help raise awareness and get people interested. And also what is evident within the newspapers at the time, you see a lot of advertisement for the junior circuit, which is basically an under 19 league that is made up. It's basically the start of our club soccer. And it's high school students mostly. So the top players, sometimes from several high schools, will get together and be part of a team, just like we see in clubs. You even have some of the college freshmen who haven't reached the age of 19 yet that sometimes play on these teams with high school students. In fact, there was a big, I think it was called Centurions, team around this time that was coached by George Logan, who was the men's soccer coach at San Diego State. So he had a youth group that he did, kind of club soccer as well, of some of the top players. I don't know where they drew from, but I'm guessing with San Diego State probably drawing a little more closer to East County. But that was the big thing. And even for leagues in the fall, we're getting a lot of leagues starting around the county in various areas. And with the Jaws getting ready to start, there were several articles, especially for where I am up in Escondido, for their soccer league, already saying in March, like, hey, signups will be coming in the summer. Like, don't miss it. But already making some of those pleas within the paper early on, because at least specifically for the one up here in Escondido, in the season, youth soccer season leading into this 1976 NASL season, the Escondido League had more than 500 players, and the year before that it was a little more than 300. So it's really growing fast, especially in the white suburbs where it hasn't really been a stronghold in terms of a sport like it has been in some of the other areas of our county. All right, and then they also announced a radio deal with KSDO, which is 1130 on the AM portion of your dial. And it's been a very long time since I've listened to AM radio here locally, so I have no idea what radio format KSDO has moved to, or even if the call letters are the same for 1130. But for a very long time, this was sports radio. And, Chargers games, Padres games, a lot of things were on this station during this time in the 70s. So to have the Jaws have many of their home matches broadcast on radio was just kind of fit in with all the other sports that were going on. So that was some of the lead up coming in terms of preparations and get ready for the start of the season. So league opener happens on April 15th. Jaws are fortunate to start at home. They're going to play the San Antonio Thunder. The 15th is a Saturday night. It's actually the night before Easter, so this is Easter weekend for these opening matches. San Antonio, they're led by the great Bobby Moore, who was the captain of the England squad that won the 1966 World Cup. And they're really hoping to improve their performance over the 1975 season, which was their debut season, and they started, where they finished dead last. They actually were tied for dead last on points, but they finished dead last. So there's really nowhere to go but up for them in terms of soccer. So they're coming in hoping to start off on a better foot for this 1976 season. And San Diego, of course, is hoping to find their scoring touch. They're hoping to walk away with all the points. I would say 3 points, but that's not how the NASL does their points for games, which we'll talk about in just a second. But they want to grab as many points as they can from this opening match, win in front of their home crowds, really start off on a good foot. The problem is, though, Jaws is still not working with their full 16-player matchday roster. They do have a 16-player matchday roster when the game comes around, but it's not what they expect to be their normal roster. They're still having to pull up some people from their supplemental roster to come and play and be available on match days. Some loanees that they expect to be with the team that were part of the Baltimore Comets, because if you remember from earlier episodes, this was the Baltimore Comets team that moved across the country to San Diego for the 1976 season because they have new ownership. So they're waiting for some of those players who have been part of this team before, but they haven't been released by their English/European clubs because their seasons are not quite over, or it's not a point where things are already decided, like they're staying up or they're going down or whatever. So they still have a couple of people they're waiting on. So it's not the full team they expect just yet. Also, one of their key midfielders, Trevor Hockey, he's questionable with an injury and not sure if he's going to play. Now, in terms of marketing for this opening match, the team is giving away, and I don't know how this worked, but there's a lot of promotional things that happened in this 1976 season with Zenith Electronics. And the team has given away $5,000 worth of Zenith products in this opening match. Now, $5,000 in today's terms in 2026, that's about $30,000. So in this opening match, they're giving away about $30,000 worth of electronics, radios, TVs, those kinds of things. At this opening match, there's going to be a winner like every 15 minutes kind of thing. So there's a lot of marketing around being here, and you can win one of these products. Now, Dylan, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, Zenith was one of the biggest names in electronics. They ended up getting wholly owned by LG Electronics in the late 90s, but they were one of the big, I had multiple through my life Zenith televisions and Zenith radios, but they were a pioneer in radio and TV technology. They had a famous slogan that said the quality goes in before the name goes on, which I didn't know they first used in 1927, but that is a slogan I totally remember from my youth. And a little side note that as I was looking a little bit more about Zenith and what happened to them, since they've been subsumed by LG, if you look at between Zenith and LG combined, because Zenith is really the research and development arm of LG right now, and they have the most members inducted into the Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame. And it wasn't until today that I even knew there was a Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame. So never had an idea. But they have the most inductees in terms of innovations in consumer electronics. All right. Any thoughts or comments about that?
Learn something new every day. No, I've never heard of Zenith Electronics. I had to double check because I thought it said Zenit as in like St. Petersburg. I was very confused where this was heading until I reread it. So, I'm totally unfamiliar.
Yeah, and that was, like I said, huge name in terms of like stereo systems and televisions, but they were very cutting edge and innovative in electronics and bringing wireless remotes to televisions and just all the things that we take for granted nowadays. They were, they pioneered a lot of the innovations. So as we said, they're doing this big giveaway. Aztec Bowl is their home stadium, holds 12,000. If you remember from an earlier episode, we talked about how Paul Deese, the GM, who's a baseball guy and really into the, kind of came up through the minor league baseball system and really into all the gimmicks and giveaways and things to attract people to the ballpark, so to speak. And you can clearly see that going on here with these giveaways. And they had said that they're looking to average 7,500 people in attendance across their matches for the season. And that's what they need to do to break even. That's their budget. And for the NASL, their primary income is from ticket sales at this time. So they're certainly looking to get a lot of people there. And I'm sure they're hoping to fill Aztec Bowl close to its 12,000 seat capacity. Match day comes on the 15th. They get a crowd of 5,200, which is certainly, a decent way away from the 7,500 that they need to average for the season. But the good news is the Jaws do win. They win on a golden goal in the overtime period. The coach has high praise for several of his defensive players, Lynn Rennery, John Napier, Alan Stevens, and Brian Joy. Said they all played excellent. There was great combination play between Rennery and Napier to lead to the goal, which is actually put in by Stan Smith. And I apologize for any Stan Smith fans because I could not narrow down. I found two sources, one that he was from Bermuda and one from Trinidad. I don't know which one is accurate, but Stan Smith was the one who put in the goal. It would end up being Stan Smith's only goal of the season. And it would also end up being the only golden goal scored by the Jaws all season, which is great in the terms of bonus points, which we're going to explain in a second for how the NASL point system works, but terrible for overtime wins throughout the season. If we go back to Stan Smith for a second, he would only see the field 5 times all season. I didn't have a chance to really, I get a lot of names out of newspaper articles, but sometimes it's really difficult to tell what happened to some of these players as to why they only got a few games. Did they leave the team? Did they get traded? So unless it's reported in the newspaper, it's really, really hard to know where some of these players went, or did they stay with the team and they were just really bench players and they didn't quite make it into, most of the games. And again, back then, like we're talking two subs a match is where we are in world football at that time. So it's not like you get the 5 substitutions that we are used to seeing nowadays in 2026. So it is possible someone could be on that 16-player roster and just never get in because they're not one of the 13 players that actually make it into a match. Gary St. Clair is the goalkeeper for this first match. He gets the shutout. And even though Gary St. Clair starts most of the preseason matches, if not all of them, I wasn't able to confirm that, he would end up getting 3 matches all season in terms of starts. Alan Mayer would assume the starting position fairly early in the season from Gary St. Clair, and Alan Mayer would be the top choice goalkeeper for the majority of the season. So how many points did the Jaws earn on this match? Well, the NASL games could not end in a draw. That was one of the things in not just the 1976 season, but definitely this 1976 season. No games would end in a draw. So if you have a draw at the end of regulation, you do 1 15-minute of sudden death or golden goal. We didn't really call it golden goal back then. And then if it was still drawn at the end of 1 overtime period, you go straight to P kicks. 1976 is actually the last year of penalty kicks before they moved to that 35-yard shootout that the NASL was really known for, from their blue line, as they call it. And that's what they had in all the fields. And since 1972, that blue line was part of the fields of all NASL matches. Do you have, I was thinking about doing this as a trivia match, but I figured we'd just talk about it. Dylan, do you have any idea of why since 1972 they would use that blue line in matches 35 yards out from goal, but not use it for that shootout that I think the NASL is known for, where a player has 5 seconds to go in and score off the goalkeeper? It did have a use for the first 5 years before the shootout was introduced.
No, I other than the running penalties, I wouldn't have a guess.
Yeah, in 1972, the NASL got permission from FIFA to alter the offside rule rather than using the midfield line as the star. Like you can't be offsides in your half. Well, the 35-yard line became the start of offsides. So you could only be offsides from the 35-yard line to the goal you were attacking. That was the only, anywhere else on the field, you couldn't be whistled for an offside infraction. So they moved that.
It's like the exact opposite of the hockey offsides law, basically, where you can't be in that last zone. Well, not the opposite, but it's similar but different.
It's similar, and you know, I'm sure that was the choice to go with the blue line. You divide the field up into roughly thirds, and you get this line out there, and you know, you have some consistency from the goal, so you're working with the same 35 yards in every match. But you don't start calling offsides till you get across that 35-yard line instead of across midfield. So it was one of the things that the NASL thought would help encourage scoring. The other thing is their point system. So you can't have draws. You go to sudden death overtime. You go to penalty kicks. Somehow, some way you determine a winner. So when you look at the records for all these teams in the 1976 season, it's straight up wins and losses. So here's how the point system works. If you win the match, it doesn't matter if you win it in regulation. It doesn't matter if you win it in overtime. It doesn't matter if you win it in PKs. If you win the match, you get 6 points. Now, you could also get bonus points. So you could get up to 3 points for every goal you score within the regulation period. Anything scored in overtime or PKs don't count. But if you were to score up to 3 goals in regulation, win or lose, you get bonus points for those 3 goals. This was another attempt at the NASL to generate some more attacking soccer. And quite different than what we see nowadays in tournaments, because frequently, I think USL Cup uses something like this, that if both teams are tied at the end of regulation before you go straight to penalty kicks, both teams get a point. But then if you win in penalty kicks, whoever wins penalty kicks gets the extra point. So you could get 2 points for your victory instead of 3 points for winning in regulation. The NASL didn't do that. It was a win or it was a loss. And then the bonus points up to 3 for what you score in regulation. So you could score 3 goals and lose a match, say 4-3. And as the losing team, if I scored all those in regulation, then I get 3 bonus points in that match. Otherwise, it's what you win. So maximum any team could get in a match is 9 points. So, you know, maybe confusing, maybe not. That's the way you do it. And this is why teams in a 24-game season had 100, you know, your top teams in divisions had 130, 140 points throughout the season because of these potential 9-point swings you could have in a match. All right, before we move on to our next game, because we had a lot of background with that one, any questions about the point system or anything?
No, I think I understand it. I mean, it seems clearly like it's set up to incentivize goal scoring, which, as we've discussed, was thought of as the main issue for soccer latching on in the United States, was
right.
Lack of goal scoring, right? Yeah, that's just like I get the motivation, but that's just a little bit silly. That's so convoluted.
It does get to be a little convoluted, and it is, you know, a little bit harsh, I think, that if you draw in regulation, especially if you're not going to use draws to your points directly, that you could draw and go to penalty kicks and still come out on the losing end of a 6-0 or more point. Like, you get 0 points out of that if you lose. But that's the way they did it. But also, if we phrase this back in terms of the San Diego Jaws, why scoring is so important in the NASL. They're trying to encourage scoring. They got a point system for it. And if you don't score, you're leaving points, even if you lose, potentially on the table. So scoring is an issue, and certainly why Derek Travis is concerned that the team is not scoring. So San Diego Jaws win this match in overtime on a golden goal. It was a great combination play between, I believe it was Rennery and Napier, as we said. And they end up with the 6 points since the goal they scored was in overtime. So they get no bonus points in that first match. But first match was a win. Even with low attendance, they start off with a win. They're starting in a good position. They actually scored a goal at some point, which they were having trouble doing in the preseason. Their second game was the very next week, on the next weekend, on a Friday. And this is... this starts getting into some of the quirky nature of scheduling in the NASL, especially for this 1976 season. Not just the season again, but this is the one we're talking about. It wouldn't be uncommon for teams to have 2 matches every weekend, and they were usually on back-to-back days, and they frequently had travel between the matches. So the San Diego Jaws are coming up to this second weekend of the league, and they're going to have 2 matches, a match on Friday at home against the Rochester Lancers, and then they're going to have to travel up to Vancouver for a match the very next day on Saturday. So certainly we're not, friendly to players, and the having to play a match on one day and then hop on a plane either after the match or in the morning the next day to get up to wherever you need to go, get off the plane, get to the stadium or hotel, I don't know which, depending on your time frame, get there, play another match, and then get home again. And the preparation is going to be challenging, especially for a new team. How do you spend your time during the week preparing for both matches when an injury on your Friday game could mess you up for your whole tactics on your Saturday game? So really were challenging times for NASL teams during this 1976 season. But we have that next weekend come up. The Jaws lose to Rochester 2-3. So San Diego scored a goal in the first game. They scored 2 goals in the second game. They look like maybe their goal scoring is getting back on track, but they've been so good defensively. It was frustrating for this Friday night match to let 3 goals in. In fact, Rochester jumped out to a 3-0 lead to start, and then San Diego would score 2 goals in the last 19 minutes by Robostoff and Napier to make it interesting, at least, but still finished as a 3-2 loss for San Diego. So they get on a plane, fly up to Vancouver, they play the Whitecaps, and the Whitecaps blank them 3-0 up in Vancouver. Now, I don't know how much of that is travel and everything else, like we just talked about, or Vancouver was that good at that time, but they now have had back-to-back games where they've let in 3 goals. So certainly cause for concerns the other way for San Diego. Now, the next weekend is going to be another series of back-to-back games coming up on Saturday and Sunday. But in between, and this was arranged well ahead of time, the San Diego Jaws are going to have an exhibition match against Mexico's men's Olympic team. So clear, and it's going to be down at Southwestern College. So this is clearly an attempt to engage the Mexican-American community in the South Bay. And they've arranged this. Mexico's Olympic team is looking for tune-up matches because we have the 1976 Summer Olympics coming up in Montreal. And again, the location change of being in Southwestern College as opposed to Aztec Bowl. Southwestern College is a little bit smaller than Southwestern College is a little bit smaller than Aztec Bowl, but still a decent size. It holds 7,200 people. The tickets for the match are $2.50, which works out to about $15 today. Those are the adult tickets, general admission seating. And I think it was like $1 for kids or something, but $2.50 for adults. So not bad, even in today's dollars, to go see any national team come and play. For Mexico, leading up into this, as we said, this is tune-up matches for the Olympics. And at this time, again, in 1976, even though we're referencing it as the Olympic team, because that's the tournament that's coming up, this is the full national team. CONCACAF teams, along with a couple of the other confederations, were not required to field under 23 rosters until the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona. So prior to that, like UEFA and CONMEBOL had to field under 23 rosters, but the other confederations could send their full rosters to the Olympics. So in this case, again, even though we're going to refer to it as the Mexico men's Olympic team, it is their full national team. Now, the national team for Mexico in 1976 is regarded as a very strong team. They've won 17 of their last 18 last 18 matches. They just beat the LA Aztecs from the NASL 6-2. They just beat the U.S. men's national team 8-2, and they look to be a real medal contender for the 1976 Summer Olympics. Now, this Mexican team is led by a highly talented 17-year-old that I'm sure in 2026 no one's heard the name of, Hugo Sanchez. So this is Hugo Sanchez coming onto the scene as a 17-year-old playing in this match. He's still about 10 weeks from his 18th birthday. San Diego, they've split their last matches. They lost their last two matches. They won their opening one, and they've given up some goals, so they're hoping to get it a little tighter for this exhibition match that they're having. And locally in the papers, they're really trying to highlight, and clearly from the Jaws, they're trying to market to the South Bay community that this is a battle between really our only kind of local product that we can identify in the San Diego Jaws, which is Jorge Castel. And that's even a stretch because he's a resident of TJ. And he is the only person who earned a spot from participating in the local tryouts. So they're looking at it as a battle between Jorge Castel and Hugo Sanchez, which has already been doing very well as a teenager for the Mexican national team. They do get 3,200 people to show up to the match. The Jaws do lose 2-1 to Mexico. Both goals are by Hugo Sanchez. In the 11th minute, he just rips a 25-yard shot into the back of the net in the upper corner. And the 79th minute, he has a 16-yard shot that he caroms off the post and into the back of the net. So two beautiful goals by the 17-year-old. And that's how it stood till very late in the game. There was an 85th minute penalty. And the Jaws were able to, or Archie Robostoff from the Jaws was able to convert it, which made it a more respectable 2-1 by the end. But, we'll get into some of the other things about this game. But Dylan, I don't know how you feel. And I wouldn't have known it necessarily at the time. And I would have been young. In 1976, I would have been 8 years old. But I just think of what it would have been like to see a 17-year-old Hugo Sanchez playing for the Mexican national team anywhere, and just, a player we know who went on to have a great career as a player and a lethal attacker. That just, would have been amazing to be able to see that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits of having a local team that can kind of, draw a competition like that. It's like you said, at the time may not have been appreciated for what it was, but it's I'm sure was meaningful to at least some of the people who were there or aware of it at the time, and in terms of their like life interest in the game. I think
Right.
These kind of things matter.
Well, if we just do a little bird walk here for a second, Mexico does go to the 1976 Olympics. Obviously, they had already qualified. That's why they're doing these tune-up matches. They're grouped with France, Israel, and Guatemala. They were certainly a favorite along with France to get out of the group. However, they lose their opening match to France 4-1. They draw surprisingly to Israel 2-2, and then draw surprisingly, but not quite as surprisingly, to Guatemala 1-1, and 2 draws and a loss, and Mexico finishes third and doesn't get out of the group for a team that really was regarded as a medal contender coming in to the Olympics. For the Jaws, or maybe our local soccer community, said earlier that the press that the Jaws were getting, even though it was sparse, was overwhelmingly positive about the team and what they were trying to do. There really wasn't a lot of criticism about the game or anything else, but occasionally there would be some. So after this match, there was one of the local sports columnists in the South Bay for one of the South Bay newspapers. His name was Dave Hatz. And I looked for more things by this particular person if he ever, during that 1976, mentioned soccer, Jaws, anything ever again, and I couldn't find anything. And he tries to make the argument that professional soccer has yet to arrive in the South Bay, and people in the South Bay must like high school soccer a lot more than professional soccer or the Mexican national team. Because for the CIF championships that year, you had 2,700 people. And then I think I just cut out for a second, so I'm going to start that again. You had 2,700 people show up for the boys' high school CIF final between Castle Park and Chula Vista. And only 500 more showed up for this professional soccer between the Mexican national team and the San Diego Jaws. So, really disingenuous kind of argument of, well, people must not really like soccer or care about it anymore. And that was only, you did have a handful of these people who only, chimed in when they had something to, what appeared to be something to complain about. And surprisingly, not a whole lot has changed in terms of that kind of stuff happening. So I just always strikes me how different we are and how further along we are in a lot of ways, and how in others it's the same old BS at times.
I believe it was Matthew McConaughey in True Detective said time is a flat circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feels like it sometimes. So the Jaws lose that match to the Mexican national team midweek. Then they go to another 2 games for the weekend on Saturday and Sunday. This is going to be their first double away trip. They're going to go up to San Jose first on Saturday, and then they're going to come back to LA to play the Aztecs on Sunday. San Jose is one of the top teams, and in the same division. So I think even at this point, they are the top team in the division. If not, they're very close to the top at this point. But San Diego goes up and shocks them and wins away 1-0. And it looks like, again, that defensive part of the game maybe is back in play. And they're able to get a goal, first away win of the season. And it's scored by Archie Robostoff, who was acquired from San Jose at the start of the season. He ends up scoring the lone goal against his former team. So things are looking up on Saturday with that away match. Then they come down to LA, play George Best and the Los Angeles Aztecs, and they get beaten, what sounds like, reading the reports, pretty handily, 2-0, in front of about 7,500 fans in, I think, the Coliseum is where the Aztecs were playing at that point. It's one of the few games I saw just a handful of stats, but these seem to be consistent types of stats that the Jaws would see in their games. Why there was concerns on offense, and how people were stepping up on defense. So the goalkeeper, Alan Mayer, faced more than 30 shots. It did not break it down to shots on goal versus shots, but faced more.
Uh-oh. I think we lost John for a second here, folks.
All right. Sorry about that. Seem to be having some connection issues here. So I think where I was is the Alan Mayer faced more than 30 shots, and San Diego could only muster 12 shots in the entire game. And again, that seems to be fairly consistent from game to game, that the other team just completely outshot the San Diego Jaws. So that was that weekend of Saturday, Sunday. Their next match would be the following Friday. And it would be one of the few weekends that they'd come up where they'd only have one match on the weekend. And they're going to play the Seattle Sounders. The Seattle Sounders were led by Jeff Hurst, who was the goal-scoring hero in the final of the 1966 World Cup for England. Seattle also has a pretty strong team. Jaws are sitting at 2 wins, 3 losses. But they have acquired a couple of people in between the previous weekend's games and these games coming up. They got Kjell Samuelsson, got him from San Jose, just part of a cash deal. He was part of the 1974 Swedish team at the World Cup. And Peter Sylvester was one of these attackers, these forwards that they have been waiting to come on loan from his team in England, or he's playing with Southend in the Division 3 at that time. And he was one of those players who'd played for the Baltimore Comets before. They were just waiting for him to be released to come to the NASL. So this match coming up on this Friday, May 7th against Seattle Sounders will be the first time the San Diego team will be what they think is their full roster of 16 all fit players. I didn't get in attendance for this particular match, but Seattle Sounders come in, they beat the Jaws 1-0, but it's 0-0 at the end of regulation. It's 0-0 through the first overtime period, so they go to penalty kicks, and San Diego Jaws end up losing 2-4 on penalty kicks. Only Keith Aki and Jim McGill were able to score their penalty kicks in that match. So the San Diego Jaws, just on the heels of their big upset of San Jose before, they come back and they lose this particular match to the Seattle Sounders. Then on the next Friday, again, they only have one match this particular weekend. They go, they're facing the Portland Timbers. And Portland Timbers are the runners-up from the 1975 season where they lost in the championship to Tampa Bay. So they have a very strong team. San Diego has this full week between matches for the first time, like one match a full week and then another match since the very beginning of the season. Final score ends up being 2-0 Portland. Portland has a goal in each half, and again, by the newspaper account, seems like they completely dominate the match. But the Jaws have finally come into a quirk in the schedule, and I'm not sure why exactly. I haven't been able to pin this down through the research, but they're on a stretch of 18 days with no matches. And it comes at a time that's badly needed. They need to regroup. They need to figure out what's going on, both defensively and offensively, so they can start doing a little better in the NASL season. But in just 28 days, which is all we covered in this, the San Diego Jaws end up playing 9 matches over the course of 28 days when you include that exhibition match against Mexico, which is just a ridiculous amount of matches to play in the first month of the season. So we're going to leave it there. We'll do a little epilogue to this before we fully wrap this up, but we're going to leave where we are in the season at this break, and then in our next installment of the series, we'll pick it up after this break and see how the San Diego Jaws do for the rest of the 1976 season. So before we do our little epilogue, any thoughts or comments, Dylan, before we add a few more things to this?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a lot. 9 matches in 28 days is a lot, but it's not that far removed from some of the fixture congestion you'll see in the modern day. You know, when you've got teams playing in multiple competitions in some of the top leagues, especially in Europe. The thing that is incredibly striking, though, no pun intended, is the back-to-back days is like, I mean, even in like a FIFA career mode, that is like absolutely devastating to roster fitness, and that's a video game. So I can't make sense of why that would have, especially traveling in between those back-to-back game days. Anyway,
You have
9
24
matches.
hours to travel and play a game.
9 matches in 28 days is a lot, even if you just assume they're spaced out as much as they can be. But the fact that they aren't is just kind of mind-boggling from a modern perspective.
The worst part about it is also the roster size is only 16, really. Even today's, when we talk about fixture congestion, roster sizes are significantly larger, and there are people that they can draw from even deeper within the talent pool of a particular team. So this is, you're asking basically 16 guys to suck it up and go and keep playing these games. And a lot of these people have already played a full season in England or Europe. They're over here technically on loan to play over the summer before they go right back into playing again when they go back to England or somewhere in Europe. So a little crazy the way the 1976 NASL season was working. All right, so let's kind of close this out. We're going to look at a few things just in terms of this first month of the season, kind of where the San Diego Jaws are from kind of a management standpoint, a footballing standpoint, you know, the facilities and a few other things. So if we look at their management, because the club really talked about wanting to be in San Diego, they were certain there was going to be a large crowd in San Diego to come see matches, and most of their revenue is going to come from ticket sales and merch. Basically, they sell at matches. They're not really coming close in this early part of the season to meeting their 7,500 attendance figure in order to break even. So that's not looking so good for the San Diego Jaws right now. They've only had 3 home matches. So, you know, they'll be making up some more home matches later in the season. But you can tell even from their home matches and what I see in the newspapers and how they promote the matches that their general manager, Paul Deese, is a gimmick guy. Like you can totally tell he's from the minor league baseball system. And looking at it through a 2026 lens is challenging because I think people certainly wouldn't quite do things the same way now in 2026, but have to kind of think of it in terms of 1976 and what people were typically doing for sports and stuff at that time. But it was certainly just any hook to get people in through the gate. There were certainly a lot of electronic store giveaways to get free tickets, like buy a washing machine, get free tickets to the San Diego Jaws. So I don't know how all that sponsorship stuff kind of worked, but And then, a lot of freebies given away at the matches, but they're certainly don't seem to be hitting their attendance numbers. On the football side, I mean, as we said, those back-to-back travel was tough, but everybody's facing that in the league. It's not just the San Diego Jaws, and they may face it at different portions of the season. Even that Mexico week, they had 5 games in 9 days. The 2 on the previous weekend, the exhibition against Mexico on Wednesday, and 2 on the following weekend. They certainly seem to have, even though they've had some games where they've let in some goals, they have the capability of playing strong defense. They have a good goalkeeper. I think at this point, if he's not leading the league in saves, he's close to it. But they're doing well defensively, but they can't score. And in a league like the NASL, you really need to score. Or again, like I said, you leave points on the table because you're not getting points for draws. Where if we were on a traditional, well, even at that time, it was only 2 points for a win and 1 point for a draw was the traditional way of scoring in world football. Some of those draws that they would have where they'd get an extra point, and if it was only 2 points for a win, like they'd still be in striking distance, but that's not the way the NASL does it. So they're really starting to fall behind in terms of the footballing part of it. In their last 3 matches, they failed to score in all 3 of those. They've been shut out in 4 of their first 7 games. They've only scored 4 total goals. They've given up 10. They only won once at home. They're clearly a much more defensive-minded team than an offensive-minded team, which, frankly, from a neutral fan perspective, not terribly exciting to watch. Tolerable, I think, if you're winning, but not so much if you're being defensive and losing. You never feel like you have a chance in the match. And unlike some of the other teams, they really don't have any big names in the San Diego Jaws, right? There's no Bobby Moore, there's no Jeff Hurst, there's no George Best, which some of the other teams have, which is great when they come in because the attendance seems to tick up a bit for people wanting to see some of these players. But there's not a player of that stature, name recognition, even though, other than George Best, he was closer to his prime, but the other 2 were certainly at the end of their playing careers. And there's very few players that actually have any kind of strong connection to San Diego. As we said, Jorge Castel is probably the only player, and he resides in TJ, and he's the one who was the walk-on for the team. There really isn't anybody else. They're just, if you're a soccer fan, you really have to love it for the soccer. But there's not doesn't seem to be a strong city connection to the team. The facility they're playing at, Aztec Bowl, it was built in the 30s, maybe the teens. God, I can't remember now. But Aztec Bowl is old, right? It doesn't have any kind of great amenities, certainly not the kind of stadium amenities we think of in 2026. The whole sports stadium experience has changed drastically over the last couple of decades. And they do try to overcome this with gimmicky kind of things in the stands, but it doesn't really seem to be connecting them to the community. And as you and I have talked about lots on this podcast is, to me, that's what you need to do to be a successful team. You really need to connect with the community. So if we split the community up a little bit and we just talk about adults who buy tickets, they're not really connecting with them. They're getting them through the door with gimmicks, but they're doing a fantastic job in the youth arena and getting out and doing training sessions and having players meet young players, trying to get them excited to get out and play soccer. And in that sense, we'll talk about it once, in a couple episodes when we really talk about the legacy of the San Diego Jaws. I think is one of the biggest things about this team is that connection, that inspiration, that helping really push that movement forward faster of starting up youth leagues and kids signing up for youth leagues and just starting to play the game and having fun playing the game. It really is the start of the explosion of soccer in our county in this modern era, and the start of us really starting to develop soccer clubs that kids go and play, as opposed to something we think about like AYSO, which is a lot more recreational. So in that sense, they seem to be doing a good job. Now, I tried looking up ticket prices, and I had an article clearly stated for that exhibition with Mexico, the tickets were $250, which equates to a little under $15 in 2026, which I think is not a problem. It's a great price to attend a sporting event as an adult. I don't think that is terribly expensive. But I did see somewhere else that tickets for an adult league match somewhere were $475. And that works out closer to $30, maybe more around 28 and $26. And I'm not sure if that's accurate. This is one of the things I want to dig in a little deeper as we do the rest of the series. Because if we compare that to the Padres, which the Chargers tickets were more expensive, right? That's one big professional team. The Padres are the other one. They play a ton of games, right? But their general admission was just $1.50, and their premium seats were $4. So if the San Diego Jaws were in fact charging $4.75 for an adult ticket, I feel like that's really going to limit the number of people that are going to come in when you could go to a Padre game and do a premium seat for less. And of course that's back when they were playing at San Diego Stadium. Obviously not.
Oh.
All right, I'm really having trouble with my internet connection tonight, so maybe we should try wrapping this up here. But one of the concerns even early on the season for the San Diego Jaws, and we know the history, they were only here 1 year before they go to Las Vegas, but it already seems early in the season that they don't really have sustainable business practices to kind of keep this team going beyond this first year. All right, Dylan, I'm going to let you jump in with any questions before we start wrapping things up.
Just one. What would have constituted premium seats at the Jack Murphy? I don't know if it was called that then, but at that, because I was just closer to the field. Because I mean, none of the seats seemed that great the couple times I went there.
Yeah, I would think it would be close to the field, along the first baseline, third baseline, but I'm not really sure because as a kid, when we ever went, we sat in the nosebleed seats. That's where my parents bought tickets. Like you were way up there. You could, as a kid, barely see what's going on, but usually you went with maybe another family and friends and kids, and as kids, you had a great time no matter what. It was fun, but I felt like we always sat in like the nosebleed seats.
Builds character.
Yeah. And I figure we also only went when one of the parents got some free-ish tickets rather than going. My father specifically, he was a soccer fan, but he hated crowds. So he did not like doing sport events. So it would be a rare occasion that we would go to a Padres match, or I remember we went as a kid, went to a Chargers match, Monday Night Football, I think, against the Jets sometime in the 70s. Might have been one of Joe Namath's last games. I don't remember, but my dad always wanted, like, if it was football, you'd leave after the third quarter. And if it was baseball, you'd leave at the seventh inning stretch. Like, you never see the end of the game. So that part wasn't fun in terms of a kid going to watch those things. All right. Let's see where we are. Trivia question. Let's go ahead and get to the answer to this. Let me get it set up. All right. So our trivia question before we started our segment were, how many Jaws players of the 23 who saw minutes, actual game minutes in the NASL league season, were listed as forwards? All right, Dylan, so are you sticking with 5 to 6? I think that was your answer before. Or are you changing it now that we've had this first little segment?
No, I'll stick with that.
All right. The answer is 8. So 23 players, slightly more than a third. Now, I mean, ideally, you could think a third of your players are forwards, a third of your players are midfielders, a third of your players are defenders. But I think more typically for teams, you don't have, you usually have a couple of forwards. You really, you know, they're your goal scorers. You go to them game in, game out, and then you have some backups. Yeah, the Jaws throughout the season are running through as many options as possible to try to find scoring combinations in order to get on track with their scoring. So that kind of gives you a little hint of where things are going for the rest of the 1976 season. But yeah, 8 total players that were listed as forwards that they had signed on the Jaws team. And I think most of them played somewhere between 3 and 5 games. They were not forwards who stuck around. It's like they kept trying to find the solution and they couldn't.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think so as well. The last comment I'm going to make is this month, and really, I think some of the women's teams have already started, but the end of this week that we're in right now in August, as we're recording this, it's Tuesday, August 11th, 2026. I think some of the men's college soccer teams have some first matches coming up this weekend. I think some of the women's teams have already started, but August is really the start of college soccer season. And if you haven't looked into the schedules yet, I'd recommend you go look at them. We have some decent teams that usually do pretty well on the men's and the women's side between all our 4-year universities, along with our junior colleges. So we're going to see if we can maybe make an arrangement to try to get out to a college match here this season, and maybe see a good contest. See if we can look ahead at the schedule and find one to try to make arrangements to go to. But I personally would really like to get out there and maybe support some of our colleges that we have and their soccer programs. All right. Just want to remind everybody that This Week in San Diego Soccer History is brought to you by the San Diego Soccer History Society, a grassroots organization looking to uncover and preserve San Diego's rich soccer history and culture. If you like what we're doing, please help us spread the word. Like and subscribe here on YouTube. Engage in our community section here on YouTube. Follow us on Blue Sky at sdsoccerhistory.org. And if you like all those things, San Diego, soccer, and history, join our volunteer team of researchers and help us out as we research for these shows and other productions we are going to be putting together in the future. You can reach me at john@bigpinedigital.com. All right. I hope everyone enjoyed this week's installment, our 4th installment, I guess, on our series on the 1976 San Diego Jaws. We're going to be back next week with another episode, which is going to be the first installment in our series about the second iteration of the San Diego Soccers. There have been 3 total iterations of San Diego Soccers, two rebirths, 2 Phoenix clubs, I guess. So we're going to look specifically at the second iteration, which started in 2001 and was very short-lived, only went to 2006, I believe, about 5 years. And we'll do that because it's the 25th anniversary of the start of that second iteration of the San Diego Soccers, which is going to lead us into this week's trivia question. But before we get there, Dylan, did you have any thoughts or comments?
No, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there. I'm glad we're gonna discuss the various iterations of the Soccers, because that has truthfully always confused me a little bit when people refer to soccer's history. So it'll be nice to get a little clarity on that.
Yeah, we will. Let me bring up trivia question, then I'll make a comment about that. So our outgoing trivia question is, can you name the former San Diego Soccers player who stepped up to coach the short-lived second iteration of the San Diego Soccers from 2001 to 2004? So one of those players from the first version of the San Diego Sockers stepped up to be the coach there in the second iteration. Can you name him? So that's the question we'll leave you with this week. Of course, we'll answer it at the beginning of our next episode when we do our first installment on our series on the second iteration of the San Diego Sockers. So you had asked, like, to help arrange that. It is slightly confusing, especially for people who are younger or newer to the San Diego area. The first version of the Sockers ran from, 1978 was when it started, until 92, I think. No, that doesn't seem right now. Anyway, in the 90s, but 15-ish years. And then the second iteration of the Sockers went from 2001 to 2006. That was the shortest one. And right now, I think we're actually on the longest iteration of the Sockers, which this third version of them has been going since 2009. So we're pushing toward 18 years now for the San Diego Sockers. This third version, who are, as we've said earlier, the defending MASL champions from the last season. Finally earned that 17th championship. All right, so hopefully we can help you keep that straight, Dylan. Okay, any final thoughts before we close up?
No, that answers my question.
All right, well, that wraps it up for us. Don't forget to send in your answers to this week's trivia question, and we will see you next time on This Week in San Diego Soccer History. Good night.